The moment the screen froze on Hayley's face in the deserted parking lot, it was no longer the image of the fragile, pitiful woman Bill had tried so hard to protect, but a pair of cold eyes, a voice stripped of tremor, and Bill's whole body turned to stone. Her admission that the miscarriage was nothing more than a scripted performance echoed through the silence of the closed room like a knife slicing through everything he had ever believed in. The sleepless nights haunted by the loss of a child, the times he humbled himself, signed over more assets, shielded Hayley from every suspicion, reminding himself he had to be the kind of man who protected his family, now all flipped against him, making him the fool. He saw himself appear in that recording not through his own image, but through every time Hayley invoked his name, every cold calculation between her and Randy. If she transformed into the wounded woman, if she managed to trigger the scar of fatherhood in Bill's past, if she forced him to relive the pain of losing a family he had carried like a lifelong sentence, he would weaken again, soften again, sign again, divide again, and place blind trust once more. And Hayley had been right until the moment the camera exposed everything. Bill's first feeling was not simple anger, but the sense that his dignity had been violated at its very root. He had sacrificed too much to build the image of a man of power who still knew how to protect his home, how to hold on to what he loved. Yet the person he had placed so close to him, the one he believed needed his protection, dared to turn his deepest obsession into a bargaining chip. It was not merely the insult of a man betrayed, but a gash into the memory of when he lost the chance to be a complete father, when he watched his family fracture because he failed to balance power and emotion. Hayley was not just unfaithful, she had laid her hand on a forbidden ground he had never allowed anyone to tread. In that instant, Bill understood he had raised a danger within his own house, giving it the perfect vantage point to observe him, memorize his weaknesses, and then strike straight at his heart. But after the first wave of shock, the same cold reason that had helped him build his empire began to resurface. Bill retraced the entire chain of events, Hayley's perfectly timed tears, those seemingly harmless contracts with her name quietly sitting at the bottom, the people in his household who suddenly took her side in the name of morality, the conveniently leaked stories that forced him to present himself as a responsible man standing by a grieving woman. This was no longer just the scheme of an ambitious girl acting alone, the picture became more structured, more precise, as if guided by another hand. Randy was not merely a shadowy lover. He was someone who understood the psychology of a seasoned man like Bill, understood media, understood the law, understood how to turn emotion into an Achilles heel. So was everything that had happened merely a stress test? A way to measure his limits, how far Bill would soften, how much he would sign, to what extent he would protect his image at the expense of his judgment before they delivered a truly fatal blow? That question pulled Bill back from the brink of detonation. He wanted to storm out and confront her, tear apart everything connected to Hayley, punish her immediately, but something deep inside clamped down on his rage, reminding him that what stood before him was not just the sting of betrayal, but a deliberate war aimed at bringing him down. If he acted impulsively, he would be exactly what they wanted, a man out of control, jealous, violent, irresponsible, perfect for the media to destroy, perfect for contracts, shares, and partners to turn away from. If he rushed to release the footage, the public would not just mock Hayley, they would mock him for allowing himself to be manipulated by such a cheap performance. And another question pierced through, was this truly the whole truth, or merely the surface layer of a deeper plan crafted by those still hiding in the shadows, using Randy and Hayley as disposable pieces? Bill sat alone for a long time, watching the video over and over, dissecting every glance, every word, every pause. The surging emotions were strangled down, making way for the cold calculations of a man accustomed to surviving ruthless battles. He knew he stood at a crossroads. Either expose everything, throw Hayley out of his life, and use his power to crush Randy, or pretend to know nothing, swallow the humiliation, continue playing the role of the man being led by the nose, stretching the game until the forces behind them grew careless and revealed themselves. Both paths were lined with blood, and both came with a steep price. If he chose open confrontation, he would preserve his personal pride, but risk shattering the fragile stability he was trying to protect, turning his family, his company, and his allies into collateral damage. If he chose silence, he would accept being the apparent loser in the public eye for a time, in exchange for the chance to unmask a larger network. The question was, could he be cold enough to move past the humiliation and weaponize it? Meanwhile, Hayley did not immediately realize that her wall of safety had cracked. She still believed she was in control, that crafting the image of a devastated, grieving woman was a smart move to secure her place by Bill's side. To her, his emotions were not sacred, but a resource to exploit. She justified herself by saying she was only protecting her position in a ruthless world where anyone who failed to capitalize on their chances would be discarded. Randy appeared at just the right time, making her feel understood, opening an alternative route: either remain forever dependent on Bill's goodwill, or twist the storyline, using his pain as leverage. Those whispered exchanges in the dark with Randy made Hayley believe she was not a victim, she was a player. She never realized that in Randy's eyes, she was only a temporary piece on a board designed to test how much Bill could endure. As the risk of exposure grew more tangible, Hayley's survival instinct would force her toward counterattack. She understood that if Bill released the footage, her image would collapse, but Bill, too, would be dragged into the storm, questioned about why he bound his name to a woman like her, why he allowed this to happen, why his legal, medical, and internal systems were so easily exploited. And from that angle, she could twist the situation. She could present a new narrative, that she had been coerced, manipulated, pressured into following a plan. She could even imply that Bill was not merely a victim, but a silent accomplice who had tried to use the lost child for his own media and business advantage. If she cast herself as the powerless woman suffering psychological abuse, while Bill became the powerful man hiding the truth, how many would choose to believe her, and how many would turn on him? In a world where every scandal can be reframed through the lens of victimhood, Hayley could very well gamble on that. Randy was different. He was unbound by emotion. He approached Hayley as a tool, approached Bill as a problem to solve, and saw the gaps in the fortress behind those supposedly impenetrable walls. Orchestrating a fake miscarriage was not just tricking one man, it was a test of the responsiveness of the whole system around Bill, his team of lawyers, doctors, media handlers, family members, and trusted aides like Joey. He wanted to learn who was loyal, who wavered, who tried to profit from chaos. If Bill reacted emotionally, it would be a sign that the attack level could be escalated. If Bill kept quiet and tightened his inner circle, Randy would know he needed to adjust the strategy. Both scenarios had been anticipated. That clinical detachment made the plan even more dangerous. Bill was not just fighting a treacherous lover, but an adversary who had already prepared exits, sacrifices, and substitute pieces. Joey existed in a gray zone that defied simple labels. He was the one who installed the camera, the one who uncovered the evidence, the one who placed the truth in front of Bill. But once the full picture came into view, a question crept into Bill's mind: did Joey do this to protect him, or to drag him into a war where Joey could influence the outcome? Joey had suspected Hayley for a long time, had noticed every disappearance, every thread leading to Randy, every inconsistency between her words and actions. His decision to actively collect proof showed he was no passive observer. He intervened, arranged, chose the timing. And in the world of power, choosing when to reveal the truth is itself a form of power. In his anger, Bill could not dismiss the possibility that Joey was using his wound to secure his own position, to eliminate Hayley, a growing threat and a destabilizing factor in the internal balance. If Joey was truly loyal, he was invaluable. If not, he was a man who knew too much, a potential leverage point or a liability. That quiet seed of suspicion burrowed deeper into Bill's already fractured trust, stopping him from fully believing anyone. Another layer of darkness lay in the place that should have been most objective: the hospital, the clinic, the medical files confirming the miscarriage. For such a scheme to be seamless, Hayley's tears were not enough. Someone had to sign, to certify, to stamp. Bill recalled how quickly the paperwork had been processed back then, suspiciously fast, unnervingly discreet, no one asking too many questions. That meant either his people trusted orders from above too blindly, or someone had intervened deliberately. Whose side was that person on? If they belonged to Bill, it was a breach of loyalty. If they belonged to Randy, it proved Randy had already infiltrated systems that should have been under Bill's control. If they were aligned with some long-standing enemy, then it meant Bill and his family had been targeted by a far longer game, and the fake miscarriage was just the opening chapter. Tracing who helped turn a lie into medical proof might be the key to exposing the network. But it might also unveil new betrayals that could overwhelm him. The struggle within Bill now was no longer about how furious he should be with Hayley, but about who he could afford to trust, and whether to destroy or exploit this shock. Part of him wanted to crush everything, wipe out every trace connected to the deceit, punish them publicly to send a message that no one was allowed to toy with his grief as a father. Another part forced him to remain calm, to use this humiliation as a mask of foolishness shielding his awakening, to wait and see Randy's next move, to observe who would expose themselves, where the cracks would appear. If he pretended to forgive Hayley, let her believe she was safe, allowed her to keep in contact with Randy, would they become arrogant enough to escalate, to reveal more links? But pretending to forgive meant living every day with the disgust for his own decision, watching the woman who had weaponized his pain continue to walk through his home as if nothing had happened. Could he endure that cost? From Hayley's side, when subtle changes began to surface, Bill's gaze growing harder to read, meeting schedules shifting, those who once defended her falling silent, faint rumors about document reviews and medical file checks drifting down corridors, she could feel a wave of danger closing in. Instinct told her she had to strike first. If there was any chance the footage had reached Bill, if Randy could not cover every trace, she needed a new script. She could turn herself into the deceived one, claiming Randy had manipulated her, threatened her, used fabricated evidence to sabotage Bill, and that she had only played along out of fear. Or she could pivot, implying she had suffered subtle psychological abuse in Bill's home, forced into a role she could not escape. She knew that in an era where the public is always ready to stand with whoever claims to be the victim, the right emotional narrative could be enough. The problem was, how would Bill respond if she chose that path? And Randy, who despised loose pieces, would he let her rewrite the script, or erase her to protect the rest of his design? Randy watched it all with the patience of a predator used to waiting out his prey. If Bill stayed silent, he knew the man was not as fragile as expected, and the game would have to escalate. If Bill exploded, Randy would reap a different reward, a shaken empire, a powerful man in free fall, cracks everywhere for opportunists to slip through. But there was one thing Randy could not fully calculate, the true depth of Bill's fear of losing his family, a feeling that was both his weakness and his fuel, the force that could drive him to ruthless choices in the name of protection. If Bill chose to fight back by using the law, the media, and financial pressure to build an even bigger trap, pretending to take the bait, pretending to forgive, pretending to be weak, only to flip the table in one decisive moment. Would Randy be fast enough to escape? Or was he, too, just a piece in the hands of someone far more accustomed to bloody wars? As night fell over the estate with its fences, iron gates, and layers of security, each of them was locked inside their own maze. Bill stood between honor and strategy, between the urge to smash everything and the discipline to hold the reins. Hayley was trapped between the terror of exposure and the hunger for power, no longer sure when she had lost the line between genuine feeling and performance. Randy moved in the shadows, convinced he was still controlling the rhythm of the game, unaware that every step could be tracked, dissected, reversed. Joey found himself under the lens of doubt. Whether loyal or not, he had already crossed the line between protection and manipulation. And somewhere out there, doctors, lawyers, signatories, seemingly harmless assistants held fragments of truth that could reshape the battlefield if bribed, threatened, or awakened by conscience. The question hanging in that suffocating silence was no longer just who betrayed whom, but who would dare see their choice through when the truth had the power not only to destroy a person, but to incinerate an entire web of power built over years. Would Bill swallow his pride to hunt his enemies, or burn everything down to save his own sense of self? Would Hayley kneel and beg for real forgiveness, or sink her teeth in and fight to survive? Was Randy the true mastermind, or just a hired storm before something even worse? Was Joey an ally, or a third player waiting for his moment? And behind those luxurious, seemingly safe walls, how many more hidden cameras, how many pieces of evidence, how many buried recordings were waiting to detonate and force them all into a war with no way back?